Welcome everyone. I'm delighted to welcome you all to our last webinar in this year's season before the summer. My name is Natalia Kucirkova. I work as professor in early child development at the University of Stavanger and at the Open University. And I also have the pleasure and privilege to direct the International Center for EdTech Impact that hosts the webinar today. The topic for today's discussion is the environmental impact and EdTech, a very important topic that unfortunately is not discussed enough. So I'm very pleased that we can have a collective reflection today on how we can really improve our understanding of what is happening in the EdTech space in relation to the planetary health and green education. We are very lucky to have Mark West joining us from UNESCO, who will start the session with his reflections. Then we'll have Maria Wagner from Sustainable Games Alliance. Then I'll say a few words about a new report that we recently launched with colleagues from Digital Promise. And we'll then hear from Parker from Digital Promise and our own Sofije. And we hope to finish on time at 6 o'clock CET. But there is really space here for questions, discussions. So please do join with any questions you might have throughout the session. And we are recording the session. So if you don't want to be on camera, then don't activate your camera. You can just write your question. We'll be posting this on YouTube. We have many colleagues who expressed an interest but couldn't join today. So we want to ensure that they have the opportunity to watch this afterwards. So without further ado, I'll pass the microphone to Mark West. Mark, the floor is yours, as they say. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Natalia, and thank you again for focusing on this interesting topic. I know this is a webinar-style presentation, so I'll try to be really brief to allow us a little more time for exchange and just share a little bit of some of our research and analysis about this topic, sort of looking at how digital changes to education impact environmental, sort of issues around sustainability, environmental issues, and also, of course, with education at the center. So just to share a few sort of thoughts, data points from some of our work and research, and then to invite more sort of discussion. So if it's okay with everybody, I'll just quickly share a slide presentation to assist this process. So let me share my screen briefly. Hope people can see my screen. Can everybody see?
Yep, it works.
Okay, fantastic. So again, try to keep this to kind of about maybe 10 minutes or so, and then we can hopefully engage in a little bit of discussion. But I just wanted to point out that, this is trying to sort of look at three things that are often treated distinctly or in silos, and that is education, issues around sort of greening and sustainability, and then issues around the, digital changes and transformation of our society. So we know all of those are affecting education and sort of trying to bring those different ideas together. And one thing that I wanted to sort of flag has to do with language, and that is, at least in education circles, I often hear words and phrases that combine sort of digital with transformations, that we understand that there's a digital transformation happening in education. And then we're also told that there needs to be a green transition. And I think those are sort of important words and phrases to keep in mind as we move this forward. So, when you look at sort of aspirational documents about education, the future of education, they often stress this digital transformation that is happening and this green transition that is needed. And I think any objective look at this would suggest that the digital transformation of education is very much in motion and sort of happening, and you need to look only to sort of visit schools today to see how infused they are with digital technologies, the discourses around what artificial intelligence, the mobile revolution is doing to education. That's sort of moving very quickly. But when it comes to the green transition, we can argue that there hasn't been any sort of green transition, at least as we would expect in terms of, reduction in fossil fuel emissions, in sort of achieving greater sustainability. So those kind of hard figures that we would look at suggest that the green transition has yet to has yet to begin, where the digital transformation is moving forward. And I also think the use of those phrases are significant. The green transition suggests to me, a transition suggests sort of a sort of a mild change, where a transformation suggests sort of inside out change. And I think that sometimes those words are those phrases are a little bit backwards, and that what we actually need is a green sort of transformation to our societies, given the risks and dangers here and now with climate change, and maybe something more like a digital transition with regards to education. So anyway, I just wanted to sort of flag some of that language that we are thinking about. Let me move on now. To the next slide. We can. Oops. Let me just pull that back up. Oh, well, we can just do it this way. So with that in place, and it won't come as a surprise to anybody who's involved in sort of discussions, debates, discourses around climate change, and that is, this concept of a world on fire. And uh, for those who are involved in the sort of climate literature, know that this is sort of the story of climate change is about fire, and about burning things and generating energy from these fires that we have all over our planet. But I wanted to sort of back up and just look at how impressive this is. I just wanted to share a few data points with you, but um, experts have estimated that the average adult alive has at their disposal 700 times more useful energy than their ancestors had just 200 years ago. So the sort of since the rise of industrialization and basically burning fossil fuels, we have so much more energy at our disposal, and we do burn a huge number of fires. It's estimated that humanity consumes over 100 million barrels of crude oil every day. And this is, of course, warming our planet. Now, this sort of incredible energy that we have produced, it does so much for us. I mean, we often sort of forget that we are the beneficiaries of all of this energy, and it has done incredible things, has raised lifespans, has improved quality of learning, has, made us sort of more materially rich than we have ever been. But with these benefits come costs, and I want to zoom in on a few of them that are sort of particular risk to education. The first one is air pollution, and many people don't know, but even the WHO estimates that the second leading cause of death globally is air pollution. Only behind high blood pressure. And of the 134 countries that are tracked by the World Health Organization, 124 of them, so the vast majority, have pervasive forms of air pollution. This air pollution comes, of course, from the fires that we produce to burn energy, but increasingly that air pollution comes from forest fires that are caused in a warming planet. And those forest fires lead often to, terrible air pollution in places that had previously had very clean air. For instance, a lot of cities in 2023 and 2024 that had some of the worst air pollution were in Canada, near really terrible wildfires. So anyway, this air pollution is a big deal, obviously, for our quality of life, our health, but it's also a major deal when it comes to even education and learning. And there have been a lot of studies to suggest that children attending schools near major highways and other sources of air pollution score much lower on tests. They have more absences, more incidences of misbehavior than students attending comparable schools with better air quality. There's also been some sort of interesting experiments where putting high quality air filters in schools and classrooms has been shown to raise student academic achievement as much as cutting class sizes by 1/3. So really significant improvements with improved air quality. So I think this is something that's often sort of not appreciated, is how air pollution seems to affect our health, but also our sort of cognition, ability to learn, and research is continuing to sort of shine light onto this. The other factor that goes hand in hand with the warming climate is, of course, heat itself. And we know that we live in a warming planet. Each sort of successive year, we're seeing, a hotter planet on average, and new extremes sort of being topped. It was from the sort of latest data available in one week in June 2023. Over 60% of the Earth's population, so 5 billion people, faced extreme heat. In 2023, 500,000 people deaths were attributed to extreme heat, and this sort of grim, march is with no sort of end in sight, with the climate continuing to get hot. Now, this clearly has implications for learning. If anybody has ever tried to read on the beach at a day where it's, over 30 degrees Celsius, or even, kind of in the high 20s, knows that, reading in that with that level of heat is very difficult. But there have been a whole bunch of studies to show how heat is really adversely affects learning, and and everything from sort of test scores to achievement. But it was found that even increasing the temperature on a test day by just a few degrees Celsius above the upper bound of the human comfort zone, which is about 27 degrees Celsius, would reduce passing rates by 5 to 10%. So just sort of having a room where somebody's taking a test be a little hotter than what's comfortable can really cause scores to decline. So a lot of research sort of shining light on what extreme heat is doing to education, and we know that many schools around the world do not have any sort of temperature control, no air conditioning, often no electricity. So these issues, and at UNESCO, we've also sort of done a lot of work to show, even what the kind of the effects are of air conditioning when that is available, how that, sort of even contributes to a warming planet, uses a lot of energy that often comes from fossil fuel. So I just wanted to flag those things. So we've talked about air pollution, we've talked about heat, but the final thing is around flooding. I was just in Tanzania for work, and in Dar es Salaam and a number of other cities around the world. Flooding is a major issue, and that, of course, presents risks and dangers to education, where students cannot participate in education due to flooding, the inability to get to school, and then flooding inside of schools themselves. We've seen terrible flooding in a number of different countries. Huge flooding in Pakistan that disrupted education for whole regions for a long period of time just a few years ago. So anyway, these are all things that are, they're threats to us as a human family, but also threats, to education and ensuring, universal learning for students. Let me move on to the next slide. So with that in mind, there is a big movement to kind of teach young people about, about climate change, and to make people aware of what climate change is, and that what might sort of be done about this. And there are a lot of really exciting technologies, and digital technologies included, that help people understand sort of what's at stake with climate change. And I think a lot of educations have been very successful in this regard, and sort of showing, the risks associated with climate change, the science around sort of climate change, um, and helping people to develop awareness of this. A lot of digital technology helps sort of to personalize this. I've seen some really cool tools where you kind of can enter your, where you live on Earth, and then it can show you how temperatures have changed over time, sometimes over a 50-year time period, and you can see, how many days are, classified as extreme heat or uncomfortable heat, and how that's increasing, and what the sort of projections are going forward, given our, continually rising fossil fuel emissions. So these are things that I think that where education has really helped to improve awareness about these issues, but awareness is not necessarily action. And again, last year we spewed more fossil fuel and greenhouse gases into the atmosphere than we did the previous year, and sort of that number keeps ever increasing. So we have yet to sort of that climate change education, yes, increases awareness, but has not yet led to a sort of reduction in the things that would lead to the planet not continuing to sort of heat. And it's also useful to note that if alien researchers were come to planet Earth and sort of take a quick, at least, correlation analysis, they would notice that increased levels of education lead to, sort of greater, less sustainable practices. That's in terms of sort of waste production, in terms of fossil fuel emissions and other things. So it is meaningful that you would hope that the correlation, more education, would correlate to more sustainable sort of practices. But in fact, the reverse is true. In countries and communities where there's very low levels of educational completion, actually tend to have more sort of sustainable practices, and are not putting as great a strain on the climate and on the environment. This, of course, is a multifaceted issue. It has to do with, wealth and material consumption and other things. But anyway, we would hope that there was at least a positive correlation between education and sustainability. And the UN has sort of made it very clear that they hope to see that, that correlation become more positive going forward. I wanted to zoom in on this because a lot of the, sort of talk about all of our, technology today, with digital technologies, data centers using tremendous amounts of electricity and power, that these technologies, that we have had, have, to some extent, have been sort of bad news, because they require power. Power has traditionally required fire, and these fires are heating our planet in unsustainable ways. But I just wanted to sort of back up and remind people that technology is how we have achieved something close to universal education. Technology is how we've achieved, where most people on Earth today are literate. And I just wanted to sort of back up and show, that technology and progress in education have really gone hand in hand, and remind people that, it was, for instance, if we looked at life expectancies doubled in the span of 100 years, from 1922 to 2022. Life expectancy on average in the world doubled in that 100-year span. With regards to education, in 1820, only 17% of children completed basic or higher levels of formal education, while today 86% of people complete basic or higher levels of education. It's also facilitated incredible gains in literacy. If someone was alive in 1800, they had just a 1 in 10 chance of knowing how to read or write. In 1930, the chance was 1 in 3, and today the odds are better than 9 out of 10 that somebody will know how to read and write. So anyway, this tremendous power that we have been able to generate, thanks largely to fossil fuels, have given us, have allowed us to achieve the education systems we have today. So the technology is a great gift, and this power is a great gift, but as we know, it does have a cost in terms of a sort of warming planet. When it comes to the sort of energy demands of EdTech, I wanted to focus a little bit on this. And on one hand, you can tell a really sort of frightening story about how much energy EdTech takes, that all those sort of computers and everything. But I wanted to back up and just sort of remind people that according to the International Energy Agency, the IEA, for instance, like data centers today, which are often talked about as, these are going to just, causing so much power and so much strain on the environment. They currently account for approximately 1 to 2% of electricity consumption globally. So that's not actually all that high. What requires a lot of energy is mechanical things, things that move, cars, airplanes, things like this require much more sort of power. And, that power often comes from fossil fuels. So anyway, it's just to say that you can tell a really sort of scary story about the energy demands of EdTech, but currently, even with the sort of, introduction of so much digital technology, there is an environmental impact, no doubt, but that environmental impact is maybe not as big as some people assume it to be. The production of technology uses a lot of energy and has a big material implant, the production of all those phones and computers and everything else. But once they're built, they don't actually use so much power. But again, we're kind of looking to the future, and we know that AI, you know, has massively more energy requirements than traditional sort of technologies. So this is something, to continue to pay attention to. And some people are speculating that the share of energy that is directed towards the sort of digital economies and ed tech and, helping to do this is going to increase substantially. Some people have suggested it could even reach like a fifth of energy consumption in some countries. But again, that is assuming no sort of major gains in energy efficiency. So anyway, this is something to keep an eye on, but the story is not as sort of simple as as it is sometimes made out to be. The same applies with sort of, issues around water consumption to run data centers and, to kind of power the ed tech we have. It is substantial, but not necessarily overwhelming or daunting per se. Anyway, we've done a lot of analysis on this in data, and we'll be sharing some of this in the future. Let me move along. So when it comes to sort of a search for solutions, I think our societies have tried a lot of different things. The climate change is no longer a sort of new concept. I mean, it dates back even to before the 1900s even. They had a pretty clear understanding of how the climate would warm with fossil fuel emissions. And this visibility has grown and grown. um, and we, meaning societies around the world, have tried different things. And one thing that they have tried is sort of conservation of power. But I wanted to sort of argue that, at least seen objectively, that has not worked very well. That power that we know and use is power we are, loath to relinquish. Once we get used to having power, we want to keep using it. Um, so this idea of sort of that we would, could use less power, and less power would result in less sort of fossil fuel emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, and help to slow or, to even stop climate change hasn't borne out. And we see that education, again, as I mentioned, has really improved kind of what researchers will refer to as cognitive outcomes about education, improving awareness and knowledge of climate change, but it hasn't been as effective when it comes to sort of students' outlooks and attitudes, emotions and intents, habits and behaviors. So basically, real world actions. And there's often a disconnect. And I also wanted to say that sometimes the solutions that education presents really put the burden on individuals, that climate change is something that you as a single individual can address, and maybe you should ride a bike and not take a car, or not fly so much, or buy the right products that are not made with plastic, and on and on and on. That it's shouldered on individuals. And I think that approach is really wrong, that this is a sort of a system level issue and requires system level responses. And sometimes by shouldering it on individuals, I think that the education system can send the wrong message. It's not to say individuals cannot do things. Nobody would argue that, but that that real solutions to climate change are going to require not only sort of national efforts, but actually some sort of global coordination, as the COP meetings and other things, try to get sort of agreement on solutions to these climate risks. So let me move on and sort of talk about the ways that education, I think, has been most effective in helping to address the kind of climate change, climate emergency, climate crisis, whatever words you choose to use there, in that they have produced a lot of knowledge and technology that is helping to move us away from fossil fuel and greenhouse gases into clean energy production. And this is, I think, something that's very exciting. And we are seeing that the cost of clean energy is going down. And by some measures, it has even slipped below the energy costs derived from fossil fuels. And anyway, a lot more of the world's power is being generated from renewable and clean sources, solar and wind. Also, nuclear, which is at least is not, spewing sort of um, warming gases into the climate. So this is one area where I think education has really done this, is the innovations to help drive this sort of green revolution and ensure that our power sources come from green sources. Another thing that I think is important to think about and what education can contribute here is, when we develop new technologies, one question is not so much where the technology comes from, that matters, but like what we choose to do with this technology. So let's take AI, this sort of quite new technology for many people, big implications and everything. Technology is often an accelerator, and what are we going to accelerate with this new technology? And let me just use some examples. AI is being used by all sorts of green energy firms to make solar panels more efficient, to figure out how to manage energy grids with much greater efficiency. I think this is all very exciting. So lots of different ways that these new AI technologies are helping to sort of, you know, move forward a green revolution, bring down the price of green, power technologies. But on the other hand, we also know that the AI technology is being used by oil and gas corporations to find new deposits of fossil fuels. AI technology can power lots of different industries and practices, which are leading to less environmental sustainability, more greenhouse gases, more extraction of fossil fuels and burning of those fossil fuels. So what are we going to accelerate with these new technologies is a really big question. I think it's one that education can help students begin to grapple with. So here we are at the dawn of this AI era. What are we going to use AI for? I also wanted to point out that it often gets into things that seem sort of simple or banal, but one of the primary uses of AI technology today is to place personalized ads. It's not so simple how all those ads that you encounter online are placed. They are auctioned in real time and in online auctions to decide what ads are placed. That infrastructure to place sort of these online personalized ads all over the internet that we see and have become very familiar with, it uses an insane amount of energy to do that. That's a big use of AI, is to sort of, to power the placing of these AI things. So those ads are adding up into this, huge amounts of energy. Is that what we want to use our AI technology for? Is that the right use of it? Is that the right use of sort of all the power that's needed for this, for these digital technologies that we have? These are important questions, and I think things that education can really help students grapple with, understanding where do we want to go with these technologies. I wanted to also speak a little bit about this idea of the Jevons paradox. I don't know if there are any kind of economists in our audience here, but the the Jevons paradox is, I think, best illuminated with, or best sort of quickly explained with an example. And this example is that, people often think that if you make a technology way more energy efficient, you won't need as much power for that technology. Uh, Light bulbs are a great example. So light bulbs, incandescent light bulbs, used a huge amount of energy in the past. They required sort of a lot of electricity so that they would basically kind of, the filament would burn and light our homes and cities and offices and everything else. And in the 1990s, labs figured out how to make LED lights, and this was a totally kind of new technology, a new way to do lighting. And it was 90%, it required 90% less power and lasted 18 times longer than incandescent light. So a sort of miraculous technological breakthrough. Fantastic. It uses 90% less power. And so a lot of people were saying, well, the amount of power that we spend on lighting things is going to go way down. It's, for sure, it's using 90% less power. And that did happen for sort of just a very brief moment. And then all of a sudden, the amount of power, energy that was used by lighting actually, if anything, would remain the same or went up. And the question is why? It's because when something becomes more energy efficient, we use it more often. So, prior to the 1990s and the invention of LEDs, you would not have kind of huge illuminated billboards, lights with skyscrapers with light shows, giant, illuminated decorations and for holidays in different cities. But now we see that everywhere. Sort of, lighting has entire floors are lit. If you go to conferences, you sort of see this. That wouldn't have been possible without this. So the Jevons paradox is that even though you make something far more energy efficient, you tend to your absolute expenditure of energy does not go up. The Jevons paradox is named after somebody, an economist who was looking at, again, the use of coal to fire steam engines early in the Industrial Revolution in the UK, and was saying how the engines would become more and more efficient to use the coal, but they kept using more and more coal because there was greater demand. So I think this is kind of an interesting idea, but what it suggests that what it sort of tells us as we enter this AI and digital revolution is probably, there are going to be some important technological breakthroughs in how we do all this data processing. And already you're seeing companies like NVIDIA and others are building, graphics cards and other things that are needed to, to process, do all this computation required from AI, and they're becoming more and more energy efficient. But just because you become more and more energy efficient, the actual total amount of energy these technologies require may go up and up. So I think this is something that points us to a world where even if we have these big breakthroughs, as we had with the incandescent lights, don't expect the power consumption to go down. And what I think this is a call for is it means that we should not expect to use less energy from our technologies. We will probably, as a world, continue to demand more and more and more power. But what we need to pay attention to is, where does that power come from? And if it's coming from green and renewable sources, then at least from a kind of climate perspective, no problem. I mean, we can use crazy amounts of energy if it's coming from sort of clean and renewable sources and not risk further warming our climate. So anyway, something to keep in mind with. And then a final idea here is that I think that these efforts to kind of deal with climate change have lessons for us with the introduction of AI, and that is, climate change is something that is borderless. It does not respect kind of national borders. It doesn't matter if you live in a country that sort of has net zero emissions and all of this other stuff. If your neighboring countries are spewing fossil fuels and warming gases into the climate, it's going to still affect all of us. The adverse effects from extreme heat, flooding, air pollution, those other issues we went over earlier. So the world has tried to mobilize. I work for the United Nations for UNESCO, and I see these mobilizations and, trying to get countries to agree on targets and commitments to, to lessen climate change. And I think we're now seeing this with AI, that people are saying that these sort of, this technology is largely also sort of borderless and requires solutions that require international cooperation and agreement. And I couldn't agree more that there is a need for international cooperation as it relates both to the climate and to some of the, I don't want to just say risks, but also opportunities arising from AI, opportunities to address some of our biggest problems, not just climate change, but poverty and a number of other problems facing our societies. That this is, that we need to come up with these sort of global ideas and solutions. And I think, over the years and decades, we have seen a sort of at least attempts to come up with kind of global solutions, and they may hold models for us as we move forward. So I hope those are just some ideas and reflections that are useful to the people in the audience, and we'll stop there. Thank you very much, Natalia.
Well, thank you, Mark. Really appreciate how you framed this complex issue for us, starting with the challenges and then moving on to more solutions. I think that optimism is important in this debate. Because we are a bit over time, I'll ask Maria to start sharing her slides, but I just also wanted to comment on the data that you shared, Mark. I hope that this will be something that you can make available to the participants, because there are also some questions about that. And I know that it's very important in the bigger discussion we are having. Maria, the floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Yeah, hi everyone. So there are so many topics, which are really interesting. So I'm really not sure like what specifically to touch on. So I will just go through my presentation and we'll try to make some connections, because there were actually really many. Let me figure out my slides. Yep. So just to quickly introduce myself and what I'm doing, I'm the co-founder and managing director of the Sustainable Games Alliance. It's like a global nonprofit cooperative, and our goal is to basically decarbonize the games industry. So we are basically at the intersection of like tech, creativity, and also education, just because like a lot of games, of course, have also educational content and they reach a bunch of people. So what is maybe interesting about the Sustainable Games Alliance and what we do, so one of the big problems is that we need to create shared values to reduce the emissions, or at least like use the energy which we have more consciously. For that, we need to understand like what are the barriers, or like how far do we want to go? Do we always need to, let's say, push the envelope when it comes to like technology in using energy, and of course understanding also the emissions of the energy we use, and try to make the energy as green as possible. So for that, we are developing a self-regulation framework for the games industry. And it's important to develop like a global framework because we are interconnected, as also like Mark said. And it's very important to develop industry-specific solutions, because we need solutions where people agree on values, and where they can work together, where they have a specific field to be able to develop like boundaries or like solutions for their specific field. So yeah, like why the games industry? So we basically reach half of the planet with the games which the industry produces. And a lot of people think, yeah, okay, it's like games. It's a digital product. It doesn't matter. But it actually really matters because, of course, the game production itself does not have a huge impact. But when you think about all the players playing your games, the hardware, this has like a huge effect. And what we try to do with the Sustainable Games Alliance is put a number on it first, and then also develop data-driven solutions, like find out how can we use less energy, because there are a lot of low-hanging fruits still, and then also see how can we make the game development more energy efficient and make sure that the energy which is used is green energy. Yeah. So there are two different things which can be tackled. That, of course, games can be used to raise awareness. This is like one topic, but what I would love to talk about is more the decarbonizing part of it, because like raising awareness through content, it's also like something what Mark touched upon. It is important, but many times we find that raising awareness does not really help in changing the behavior. So we, as the Sustainable Games Alliance, we really focus on how can we more raise the awareness within the industry and the C-level of the different companies to them, make them aware, and then use their product to create more awareness. Here is some data when it comes to the games industry. As said, like a lot of people think, okay, it's digital, it doesn't really matter. But actually, if you add up the numbers, so we have at the moment an estimate that the games industry is responsible for 50 million tons of CO2 worldwide, which equals the emissions of Sweden or Norway. And this is because if you take into account all the energy which is used to power the devices and produce the hardware, this is basically the biggest problem. And at the moment, the problem is also we don't know the real numbers because not that the companies don't report because the greenhouse gas protocol is it leaves a lot of gray areas. And because of that, a lot of companies don't report. And of course, because of the lack of political pressure to report, we still don't know the real numbers. And this is what we try to change with our standard, basically, where we try to encourage the whole industry to open up their numbers so we can start comparing and be more effective and more efficient and help each other out. And there are like little things which can really make a huge difference. I just like make one example, what, for example, Fortnite did. I don't know like if you have ever heard of Fortnite, but like it's a really huge game. And what they changed is basically they changed the pausing screen, the frame rate of the pausing screen. And it saved up, like it saved 73 gigawatt hours per year just through this little change, because so many people are playing this game. And basically within the game, it did not make a huge difference. So these little things matter. Yeah. So as said, like at the moment, unfortunately, there is not a no common understanding on what companies need to report and what they can leave out. And because of that, we don't have comparable numbers. And if we don't have comparable numbers, it's hard to say what is the actual footprint of the games industry. Here you see what the different really big companies report when it comes to Scope 3 emissions. So you see there is like a huge lack of data. Some companies don't even account for their player emissions, which is crazy. Yeah. Yeah, and that's what we try to change. And of course, how do we do that? It's important to get everyone involved. So like the companies, civil society, and the players. And it requires to find out, okay, to create a space where we can talk about these gray zones, to create a safe space also for companies to jump in and talk about their sins, kind of, right? And agree together how do we want to solve this topic. Define common language and benchmarks to say, hey, is there maybe a benchmark of how much energy can a game use, for example, and when it gets like too much, so stuff like that. So that's why we like how we build our team is we work with scientists, we work with the civil society, and like what is really, really important, of course, we are backed by the industry itself. So we develop a standard for the industry, but we make sure that it is not just like a greenwashing thing where they say, oh, this is all right, here you have a green stamp, but like it is really something where they have to report on their emissions. Yeah, so this is basically, again, just saying it is important that it's a global network, and that people spread the knowledge so that it's not just like a standard, like a lot of legal requirements are, but that it's a living standard, that it's used by the industry and spread, because this is the only way we can work together and really achieve emission reduction. So yeah, these are our like some of our current partners. I tried to run quickly through because we just have 10 minutes. This I think I also covered. So we built the standard on the greenhouse gas protocol and make sure that the industry contributes, but also yeah, the civil society. And what is like really important to get everyone on board is, of course, we help games companies with the compliance, but on the other hand, it's important that we create data-driven action, that it's not just like empty promises, but that we really make sure to track how much emissions, like how does the value chain look like, where are the biggest emission problems, and how can we as a community, like as an industry, make sure we reduce these emissions and address, for example, yeah, like not green energy. Yeah, that's from my side. Let's try to engage in conversation the last 10 minutes.
Thank you.
Sorry
so much
for the run through.
No, I really appreciate your presentation and your work in the space. Thank you so much, Maria. We have some time left for also Parker and Sophie, who are on the call, who would share some thoughts and reflection on a recent report that was published, as I said at the beginning, in collaboration with Digital Promise and the International Center for EdTech Impact. Because we're running a bit out of time, I'll ask Parker and Sophie to come in now, if you don't mind, and briefly share what you thought are the key takeaways for today's discussion and more broadly for EdTech and environmental impact. Parker, please start.
Yeah, happy to hop in, and I'll be super brief here. Hi, everyone. I'm Parker of Nostrand. I am with Digital Promise. We're a global nonprofit based in the US, working at the intersection of research and education for more equitable outcomes for all learners. I'm one of the authors of this report, and I have another colleague, Stephanie Mills, who is also a colleague, who is also an author of the report, and I'm representing both of us here today. And I just want to reiterate what Mark said, that the biggest changes will happen at the systems level, but educators and education leaders might still be wondering what they can do and what they can advocate for to build up to those systems levels changes. And so I just want to briefly touch on the idea of certification. That's very close to the work that I do and the work that Natalia and other members of this call do. And there are a lot of environmental certifications. There's a lot of education technology certifications, but there are basically no EdTech and the environment certifications. But what can we do in lieu of that? And that's making sure that our use of education technology within a classroom, within a school system, and even at the national level is very intentional and closely aligned to what actual learning outcomes and learning goals there are for the learners. It's really easy to say, here are the shiny new tools, AI is and everything, let's go forward with this, AI is the future, so let's just use as much AI as possible to help our students understand how to use it. But that's not going to be an effective use of technology. That's not going to be a sustainable use of technology. And by using existing certifications about effectiveness of EdTech, usability of EdTech, accessibility of EdTech, research basis of EdTech, that's how we're going to be able to make the most informed decisions about which EdTech is used and to make sure we're not overusing that EdTech in an unsustainable way. So yeah, I'll end there. I'll get off my soapbox and I'll pass it over to Sophie.
Thank you very much, Parker. Thank you, everyone. I think you said everything that I want to say, but I can just finish while saying, like, a reminder, it's more that the EdTech industry exists within the larger ECT ecosystem and inherits many of its systemic environmental harms. So that's why with our report, we highlight all of these invisible, let's say, environmental costs that we have. This intensive energy use, especially the e-waste, that usually there are, yes, in countries like Sweden or Europe or America, we say that we are sustainable of this, but who handles the e-waste? And also the short device cycles that we mentioned before. So but I would like to say that I agree that it should be something more institutional and shift from individual choice to systematic responsibility. And that in education, lastly, like, education is about modeling values. So if we teach sustainability, but let's say we use disposable tech, I don't know what message we are really sending. So yes, and it's not about abandoning innovation. It's more about, like, shaping it responsibly and collectively. Thank you.
Many thanks, both, and thank you for sort of highlighting the importance of certifications in this space, Parker. As you say, we need to have a clear way of signaling when good practice is happening. And in the EDU evidence framework of the 5 E's, environmental impact is one of the E's, so to speak, as an important facet of evaluating the impact technologies have on education. And as you highlighted, and the previous speakers also touched on, it is very much about moving away from the awareness raising towards some actionable behaviors that we can be incentivizing in the sector. And I find Maria's and the Games Alliance efforts in this space really laudable and important in terms of coming together and building a shared framework that we can stand for as an industry. Are there some quick questions for any of today's speakers? Any comments, people from the audience? I'll spotlight you, Marg, as well. I should also mention one of the things I wanted to highlight in my presentation was the importance of talking about environmental impact at different levels. So we touched on the sort of micro level in terms of what is happening with specific products. And indeed, as Parker and Sophie said, this was part of our report in terms of how we looked at what is the content of individual EdTech products, what could they be doing in terms of raising awareness, but then also moving towards the meso and macro level. And that is indeed how we are currently thinking about incentivizing the industry. So not thinking only about the micro level, what is it that you're doing with your product and within your organization, but also what could you be doing for the broader environment. And that starts with the classrooms where you're entering with your products and services, and then moves towards the macro. How are you inspiring the field? What are you doing for others so that they can follow the modeling that we need for more green education? Okay, no immediate questions. In that case, I will thank our speakers for today's presentations, for framing the really complex discussion that we need to have in relation to environmental impact with some important numbers that are coming and that we are aware of but haven't done enough to act on. Many thanks for highlighting the key challenges that are in the space, but also the solutions that are possible, and for the collective effort that we are putting into this to really come to the system level solutions that the topic needs. Many thanks for joining, everyone, and I'll see you after the summer at our next webinar in September. Thank you all. Goodbye.
Thank you.